As a director, it's really important to learn how you plan to do something, not just what you want to do. So as the first AD, my job is to make sure that the day is actually going to work. The director's job is to make sure that the movie works. And we're having the same conversation, but we're just doing it from two different sides.
Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatov and Anthony Epp, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made on your own terms.
Let's dive in.
All right, welcome back to another session of Off the Lot. My name is Anthony Epp, and I am running solo again this week. Ken is back planning for some reshoots and some edits. What you hear in the background may just be my cats, who are very happy that it is Saturday and that I am home from set for the weekend. As we were talking about last week, I kind of dialed in. I was finishing up week one of production on a film that I am currently the assistant director on. And I have now finished week two. We have just about 5 weeks of production on this little horror film that I'm working on. The film is called Sundowning, and it is, I can't tell you where it's going to be shown, but I have been working quite feverishly on this for the last couple of months. Actually, I was working on it in prep, and then I actually got the script for it in November, December, and met with the director and met with the producers to determine, first of all, if I was a good fit for the show, but also to maybe share some of my thoughts about how we could make it. And what we settled on was a 23-day filming schedule, which is still short. It's in the realm of what, low budget feature filmmaking is about. And I just got to say, it's exhausting. I have entered back into this assistant director realm really just for this film, after having been producing and production managing for the last couple of years. So being a first AD again is really cool, because I kind of get to flex my on-set muscles a little bit more again. But more significantly for me, and this is kind of the topic that I want to get through today, is for Ken and myself, we're both filmmakers first, and that's sort of a multi-hyphenated title because, we both write. Ken is Ken is a writer and a director. I call myself like sort of a producer, director, writer hybrid. I spend a lot of a time in the producing world, and then of course, as a career, I've made my career mostly from being an assistant director. And I kind of wanted to talk today about how being an assistant director has helped me to learn more and more about what it takes to be a director. It's kind of like having a front seat to how being a director works. And the mechanics of being an assistant director, I mean, the two are in the directing department, but being an assistant director and being a director are two fundamentally very different jobs. It's not like you get promoted from assistant director to director, at least not naturally. But what I think is something that maybe is lost is that even though that's not a natural career path, being an assistant director is actually, I think, a fundamentally strong way to develop and hone the skills that you need to become a powerful and very effective director. Because ultimately, in the end, a director has a vision, and the vision is, what the movie's going to look like. Kind of being the first audience member, the director is setting the tone for what the audience is going to see when they watch this film, and being the artist and being the auteur of deciding, how the scenes are going to play emotionally and what shots to get and what performances you're looking for and casting the actors and so on. But I also would like to add that a director's vision also has to keep in mind as to how the movie's going to get made, not just what we're making. And I think that the two are inseparable. The vision is something that the production gets, but the production can't execute a vision. A vision of what you want your movie to be is a wish list. And the production of the movie is much more about how realizing that vision can be achieved. And I think as a director, it's really important to learn how you plan to do something, not just what you want to do. And so that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today. So let me just sort of paint a picture for you. Imagine this week, for example, we had a couple of later nights, not like overnights, but we had some midnight wraps. And so it's like, imagine it's like, 11:47 on Thursday night, and we're supposed to wrap at midnight. Cameras have to wrap at midnight. We've got 2 more setups, and our actors are basically like ready to go home. We've had a very emotional day of like, scenes and so on. And I'm, as assistant director, always sitting right on set near the monitor, near the camera, and I'm watching the director and the DP kind of work out how we're going to achieve the rest of the setups that we need to get in this next like 13 minutes. And it's making decisions at that time of like, what do we keep? What do we lose? And what can we steal back tomorrow? And these are all practical decisions that we have to make, but always keeping the movie in mind. Like I would say, as an assistant director, I work for the movie. I work for the project that I'm on. Working for the movie means working for the director, but also working for the producers as well. I have to wrap the film at 12 o'clock midnight. We can't go 20 minutes more, 30 minutes more. We don't have the resources or the money or the ability to do so. So as the first AD, my job is to make sure that the day is actually going to work. And the director's job is to make sure that the movie works. And we're having the same conversation, but we're just doing it from 2 different sides. So 3 weeks from now, we are going to wrap, and that we have 13 more days of production to do. We've shot 10 already. And as I'm going through this process, kind of voyeuring the director and seeing how his process is, it's helpful for me because, of course, in only a few months, if the financing and everything else come together, I will be directing my own next feature, which would be The Quiet Canadians. So it's kind of giving me a very good insight and a very good thought process. And as I go through this, of marrying the idea of having a vision for the film, having a taste, having an eye, having some, creativity in how I want to portray this film, but also understanding how the movie is going to be made, and understanding that the process that I'm witnessing right now, that I'm helping shepherd through and getting through to make this movie, is the same process I'm going to have to go through as a director as well. And, I only hope that I have an assistant director who is thinking about the same thing that I am thinking about, which is not just I have a vision for the film, but that I also want to be looking for how I'm going to achieve this, how are we going to get through our day. Yeah, so that's kind of where things go. And so what I want to talk about today a little bit more is the idea that there's 2 halves of this job. So every director worth watching, I think, is both creative and technical at the same time. The look of the film is actually downstream from the build of the film. And so you have a look for the film, and then you also have a way of how you plan to build the film. You don't get to necessarily pick the movie you want to make and just hand it over to a line producer to figure out how it's going to get made. As a director, I think you have to go into it understanding and with concept of, for yourself, that the movie you're about to make is how you make it. Like the making of it is actually the how. Let me lay out what I mean, because this might get a little bit confusing. The movie industry oftentimes separates us from the creative side to the technical side. There's the visionary side of things, and then there's the craftsman side of things. And I think Clint Eastwood is really good as an example of a director who directs artistically, but also directs very logistically as well as artistically. You have Eastman on one side, Clint Eastwood on one side, and David Fincher on the other. You have an artist and you have an engineer. And this, I think, is a false choice. And every director worth watching, I think, has both elements. They have the artist and they have the engineer. And the ones who survive making a feature are the ones who understand that before they get to set. Like Clint Eastwood's economy isn't necessarily his style. It's just a production philosophy that he's using to produce his style. There's famously where Clint Eastwood is like, 2 takes, move on, daylight's burning. And so his thing is moving efficiently through the day. And that's not minimalism. That's not like just sort of trying to move fast. It's just making sure that you understand that making a movie is about efficiency. It's about economy. And that's the style. That's Eastwood's thing. Catherine Bigelow, for example, shoots very kinetic because she builds a unit that's movable, that can move fast and get shots off. Denis Villeneuve holds long because he has a schedule that allows him to move long. Roger Deakins as the cinematographer lights the way he likes because he and the director agree before they talk to anybody else what the movie is going to be and what it's going to take to get it. So the look of the movie is actually downstream of the build. You don't get to pick the movie and hand it over and figure out how to make it and so on. And the picture is how you make it. And the schedule is the screenplay is sort of second draft. Like you make a draft of a screenplay, and then the second part of that is the schedule of how we're going to do it. The crew are the people that you're actually now worried about. The crew is the gelatin that's going to pull this all together. And your daily plan is the storyboard. It's the creative element of how you're going to make this part of your movie. And that's the part that, as an assistant director, I've been learning for the last 20 years. And I'm starting to kind of understand that the two are not separate. Most early form directors, they don't really lose their film because they edited it wrong or they shot it wrong. They lose it because in pre-production, they realize that the vision that they have fallen in love with can't be built with the days and the dollars and the people that they actually have. And they don't realize that until it's far too late to do anything except to start compromising. So I think it's important to understand where, as a director, your limits are in making a film. So you are given a project, and how are you going to accomplish it? So being an assistant director kind of gives you that best seat in the room, if you will. It allows you to watch how the director works. And one of the fascinating things about working on this set right now, I'm quite happy to be working with him. I think he's a very good director. I've worked with very good directors. I've worked with some people who were very first time and very green, and you sort of had to shepherd them along. What I think of it as that the director gets to be inside the scene. The director of photography gets to determine like what you're going to see in the frame. And the assistant director is really the only person whose job is to see the entire day and the entire schedule all at once. And so then you start to learn as a director what a day on set buys you. So if you have 12 hours a day to shoot, what does that buy you? And start planning your film shoot around that. And one of the interesting things that I've learned is, I should say I've learned it. It's just that I've worked with a lot of directors who don't think about this way. They have a shot list of say 50, 60 shots for a day of work. And they don't realize as they go into the day that they don't have the time for 50 or 60 shots. But if you're a director who understands how the movie is put together and you know that you're only going to get 20 setups in a day, you don't think of it as a compromise when you're putting your film together because you plan your shoot for that. So I have always seen, especially in behind the scenes footage, people watching Coppola, watching Scorsese, watching Spielberg even, and watching, even some lesser known directors who direct more action films and things like Martin Campbell and some people like that, even David Fincher and so on. They don't just have the theory of filmmaking, even Quentin Tarantino for that matter. They don't just have the theory of filmmaking. They don't have just like shot grammar in their heads. They don't just learn like the Kuleshov effect and all these other things and how to talk about different filmmakers at a party. You see them on set working on the film project, but you also see them on set working through practical problem solving. They understand how the movie needs to be made, and they understand how and where the camera should move, and they understand what moving the camera means. Not just from a creative standpoint, but from a logistical standpoint. What can they do with the tools that they have at the time? They understand, and I think as an assistant director, I learned to understand that the 11th hour on a 12-hour shoot day, when you have to choose between a close-up and a wide that gets the geography of the room, what you're going to be able to keep. And understanding that as an assistant director, what is achievable in the time that you have. And I think as an assistant director, you just have that best seat in the room. You have a better seat than the DPs. The DPs notoriously are focused very much on their own part of things. The director is inside the scene too much. And the AD is the only person who's seeing every department, every actor, every minute, every moment in real time, all the way to the wrap. I'm watching a director make 100 decisions a day, and I'm watching what those decisions cost. Watching a director make compromises on and combine shots because they want to make sure they get the day. And then seeing how they plan to use still what they've lost in the day, how they still plan to put the scene together. One of the things as an assistant director is you start to learn what time management is all about and how to manage and how how to manage your day, how to manage time. So you understand what 12 hours gets you, what 14 hours gets you. You understand that more than many early form directors do, because early form directors walk into set with the shot list that assumes that they can get as many shots as they need to in the day. And as an assistant director, I walk onto the set going, I know we're only going to get X amount, 15 setups in a day, 20 setups in a day. And so I think to myself, well, if I were directing this movie, and it's kind of, I'm always playing that role in my head. If I were directing this movie, what would I keep and what wouldn't I keep? If I could only get to 25 setups in the day and I thought I wanted to get 40, what would I keep and what would I get rid of? And it's interesting because you start to play that scenario in your head of like, this is what I actually think I need for the movie. And this is what I think would be useful for the movie. And you're doing that while watching the director make their own decisions about what they think is important. And I think that then as a director, and I know that we experienced this on 13 Miles, when we would walk to set, like we were both assistant directors. And so we'd understand walking to set how much we could accomplish in a day. Many times, like we shot 10-hour camera days. Like I think we maybe went over 10 hours once or twice on the show. But I always think to myself that was part of the economy, is that we knew what we could accomplish. So we never tried to plan our days more than what we could accomplish. And then as a result, over the course of the film, we knew how much money we had and how many days we could afford. So we made sure that our film schedule matched the reality on the ground. So then the other side of it too is also learning this idea of there's a really interesting or a really funny way of putting it is that, when you start the film each day on a film set, you're trying to make Ben-Hur. In other words, you're trying to make the biggest movie possible. And then when you end the day, you're basically in a scramble and making a documentary. And not to diminish documentaries and not to diminish Ben-Hur, but the idea being is at the beginning of the day, you feel like you've got all the time in the world. And at the end of the day, you have no time in the world. So at the beginning of the day, you take an hour to do a setup. And at the end of the day, you take an hour to do 6 setups because you need to get those 6 setups in. And I think as an assistant director, the thing that I've picked up along the way is learning that, like, what's the cost of one more take each time? Like, if you know that each one take takes an extra 5 or 10 minutes, what's that going to cost me at the end of the day? If I do one extra take per hour, for example, and each take takes about 4 to 5 minutes, and a take is basically like, calling action and calling cut on a particular take. Let's say you've got one setup and you get 5 takes on that one setup, or 3 takes on that one setup. You realize that the cost of doing one more take, even when you think you've got it, but you want to do one more for quote unquote safety, or you do one more just for the heck of it, is that 5 minutes that you took to get that next take at 10 o'clock in the morning or hour 2 of the morning. If you do that every hour, you basically in the end wind up with an hour's worth of time that you've spent getting extra takes that you might not have needed. So every choice on set becomes a trade-off. Every minute that you spend here is a minute you can't spend elsewhere. And so really good directors that I've watched make really good movies understand this in their bones. And so they don't get precious about a take that's working already. Like if they've got the take, they move on. They don't chase perfection. They especially if they know they're getting coverage, they don't chase perfection. They go for it and then they move on. They go for it and they move on. We're not David Fincher where we can get like 99 takes of a particular setup because we just don't have the time or the money to do something like that. They know they're going to cut around the things that aren't perfect anyway. So they know that they're going to be, slashing and trimming and fine tuning this film in the edit anyway. That they know they got the performance that they needed to get to 80%, and then they can use the edit to make it 90, 95, 100, or 99%. I guess nothing's ever perfect. And you don't learn that in a classroom, I don't think. I think you learn how to get the shots, but you don't necessarily learn like, okay, you have an hour to get a scene. So now what do you do? And I think if I were you, I would, if you have an opportunity, watch Ron Howard's masterclass on directing a film, because he really shows you how to be economical with regards to how you make your movie. And I think a lot of this comes from learning only by watching it happen. So you have to kind of be there to see this happening. This is all very theoretical until you're actually on set doing it. And this is one of the reasons why I think being an assistant director prepares me and prepares other people who are assistant directors for the real battle of directing a movie in a way that I think it's maybe even arguably, I would say, more effective than a person who has really good vision, who is directing a first or second feature. They might have written a really fantastic script, but I would argue that if you had to learn something, if you had to do some on the job or learning, I would become an assistant director again in a heartbeat. One of the things that took me a long time to understand is that blocking, for example, when a director blocks a scene, they're not just deciding where the actors are going to stand, they're deciding what the day is going to look like. They're starting to think to themselves, okay, I have 2.5 hours to get this scene. I'm blocking the scene. This is how I want the scene to play out. Now I know I have 2 hours to get it. Now I need to design my shots or plan my shots in a way that achieves the purpose of the scene in the time that I've been given. So whether or not I'm going to use a dolly in the shot, or whether or not I'm going to be using jib arms, or whether or not it's fancy camera tricks or one-ers or all these other things that we all, romanticize about as directors, things that we always want to do. We want to be the person who comes in and does this most amazing shot. But really, your job as a director is to get the movie made. And a friend of mine said this, that nobody ever leaves the movie theater humming a two-shot, which means that it's the whole of the movie that people care about, not like one particular scene or not one cleverly drawn up shot list or something like that, or a shot that's intricate and complicated that you try to achieve. So being a director becomes about solving production puzzles and creative puzzles at the same time and with the same decision, because the two are actually intertwined with each other. So as a director, I always think to myself, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to block not just for the scene that I'm about to film, but I want to block the day out the way that I think that will get me all the stuff I need in that day of filming. Because losing a day or losing a scene is actually more costly than getting half of the day done perfectly, because an unfinished movie is a very expensive decision. Whereas a finished movie that is mostly well made, got everything in the can still be fixed and maneuvered and massaged in post-production. And even, Ken and I were talking last week about post-production, about watching the edits of your film and realizing that, those first couple of times you watch the edit of the film, it's only ever so slightly watchable. These movies are not that, when you, in whole clay, they're not that good. It takes a lot of refinement in the edit. And as long as you're giving your edit and your editor pieces to work with, that's the most important part. Not so much that you got like the perfect performance on one day. And I see this all the time. And I mean, I get there too, where I'm watching a particular take and it's magical. It's amazing. It works out really well. And you think to yourself, well, in the end, that wonderful take we just got is going to show up for 10 seconds in the movie. The really wonderful part is going to take up 5 or 10 seconds in the film. And the movie itself is what has to carry the film. And I think that is something that, if you're trying to learn to direct, you need to understand that economically, you want to have time at the end of the day to make the scene be as good as the one that you got at the beginning of the day. So, that's a really interesting thing about being an assistant director, and especially coming back to this world after being a producer and a PM for a few years, is being right in the middle of it and sort of having a hand in helping make these decisions happen. Watching a director who can understand how that the blocking choice is the same as a schedule choice and is the way to do this economically. And that makes a movie fast, it makes it well, and it makes it possible. And so I think that's what, if I'm going to land the beat of what my education as an assistant director has been over the last 20 years, it's kind of that I think running a set and making the day has become a valuable learning process in how I think about directing a movie and directing my own next feature. Directors get rewarded for making films on budget and on schedule, but also making them good. And I think that I definitely feel like I have the skills to make them on budget and on schedule. And making them good is the creative element that I am oftentimes don't quite think that I have figured that part out yet. But I realize that that skill comes from learning how to make them well and make them on schedule, make them on budget. How does this matter for, say, for example, The Quiet Canadians, which is the feature that I'm working on? Is that I can't separate that vision from the execution. The vision and the execution are married together. We have, in the current script, 83 night scenes, for example. We have sieges at night. We have um, lots of different locations. And as I work through this with logistics, and talking with Helena and talking with my partners and making the film, I'm trying to keep all of that in mind of going like, there's a movie that needs to be made here, but also needs to be made efficiently and economically. And I can't outsource that decision making to everybody else, because the movie itself relies on that decision paradox in order to be made, and in order to be made well. So, what are the scenes that are uncompromising for myself? There's definitely some bits that need to be trailer bits that are kind of like, fight scenes and things like that, but also just dramatic beats that we think are going to really make the film special. Those are things I want to make sure we're budgeting, schedule, and time for. The visual language of the film. Again, there's a lot of nights in the film. So how can we shoot the film economically at night? Not just, we're going to compromise and make it all day, but like, can we find ways to shoot this to maintain that sort of night stealth quality that a spy film really kind of needs? And then on top of that, figuring out the set pieces. Like, we don't want this to be a contained thriller. This is meant to take place from Vancouver to Halifax. But filming from Vancouver to Halifax is not really that practical sometimes. So what you got to do is figure out, okay, well, what can be done in economical way so that we make it feel like the movie has a cross-country vibe to it, but not feel like we have to constantly be filming in different sections and pull the entire unit and the entire crew all the way along. And that matters, and that's mattering on how we are planning the Quiet Canadians. Those sequences that I talked about, right now we look at it and we think, okay, that's going to be roughly 24 to 25 days of filming. So that's the schedule that we're thinking that we need to work within. So in 24 to 25 days, now we have to re-engineer how these scenes are going to work and look for practical solutions. Like, maybe there's some things that we're like, okay, well, that's stuff that we should probably plan to build a studio set for example. And these are all part of the vision. This is all part of the idea of saying that when we get to pre-production, we're going to have a plan of attack that really just then lends itself to adding in the creative elements, adding in what the production designer, the DP, the wardrobe, and everybody else are going to bring to the table. And, this is not just math, right? It's creativity matched with math. So as an architect, if I was building a building, I would be thinking to myself, not just like designing a really beautiful building, but how does it structurally sound? How can it structurally survive in Vancouver or in Miami or in earthquake zones or in flood zones? And if I was a chef, I would be thinking to myself, it's not just about like what I want to make. It's about what's the recipe? What kind of ingredients do I need? Where do I get those ingredients? What sourcing do I want? Do I want fresh and locally organic and all this other stuff? Or am I willing to go for like Costco brand or whatever it is? Those are the things that you start to think about then as a director. And as a director, you have to think to yourself as the chef, as the architect of the film. But you can't just sit there and say, I want it to be a certain way. You have to understand what it would take to get it. You need to know what the ingredients are. What are you planning to add to it to give it that spiciness or that, special sauce that's going to make it so much better. And that's not something you outsource. So tying that back to the thesis of what I'm talking about is that being an assistant director, that's the assistant director is learning the ingredients and the recipe and all these other things. And the chef is the vision. Chef is, this is what I want. The recipe is, this is what I need to get it. And then what I do is I outsource the pieces of that to the departments that are going to build that for me. So, whether we know we need to build a big set for a fight sequence. That bit set's going to have to be built and it needs certain parameters. Okay, not my responsibility. That's for the art department to figure out. And this is about being strategic in your approach to your film, not just saying, I have a script and I have a vision and here's my storyboard. You guys figure out how to make it. It's like taking it and going, I have a script, I have a storyboard, I have shot list, I have a plan of attack that I want, and then here's how I think we can do it. And then let your departments take that and run with it. Like, they will understand that you have thought about how you want to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And that takes it more than something that is just a beautiful idea and puts it really down on paper and makes it, more than just a vision board and turns it into something very pragmatic. Now, one of the core arguments here too is that, you want to turn that production and assistant director knowledge into leverage and not make it a leash, not be something that holds you back, not be something that says you can't achieve something. You use that producer, assistant director knowledge that because it will protect you from disaster and it'll protect you from trying to do things that you can't do. It allows you to take intelligent risks and not be risky, but take intelligent risks. So everything I've just said, the product knowledge that, being an AD and, this integrated theory of how vision and build are the same job, all that's real, but it's also a trap. And I'd be lying to you if I don't talk about that as well, because here's what happens with producers and assistant directors who direct. We know too much about how things get made. We know what they cost, and we know what's hard and what's easy and what's possible inside of 25 days or 20 days and what is not possible. And that knowledge, that same knowledge that I've just talked about, can quietly, politely, and almost invisibly talk you out of ambitious choices before you ever try to make them. And so you start to already stop yourself from trying for things that you shouldn't try for. You a producer, director, producer AD who becomes a director walks onto set already knowing the answer to, can we afford that? And the answer is no. So we don't ask. We don't even let ourselves want that. And so, like I'm always saying with the directors I work with, is like, your job is to fight for what you want. Our job is to figure out if we can do it or how we can do it. And if we can't do it the way that we initially talked about, we look for a way to do it. It's like, we're in the miracle department in that we're trying to make things happen that may not be possible. We try to make miracles happen. So that's what can be the trap of all of this, is that if you're too linear in your thinking, what can come out of the end is that you have a competent, achievable, well-managed, but a perfectly forgettable movie. And I've watched that happen as well, as producers and assistant directors make pictures much too small than what they should have been. Not because they didn't have the vision, but because they actually know too much about how it's put together. The logistics of something talk them out of trying to do something more. And we've run into this as well with Quiet Canadians and things like that, where it's like, we know how hard it is to make films, so we're trying to make it easier on ourselves. We're trying to say, oh, maybe we make it for less money or something like that. And in the end, what you think to yourself is, well, maybe I'm actually compromising too much. Maybe I'm giving up too much on the vision of the film. And, the directors that I admire the most, like Eastwood, Bigelow, Villeneuve, Deakins as a DP, Scorsese, Spielberg, all of these, they don't make safe pictures, but they do know how production works. And they use that knowledge to protect their ambitious vision and not to shrink it. And that's a very big distinction, I think. And that's the entire game that we're trying to work with here. So here's the question I keep asking myself is, how do you hold both? How do you know exactly what an 83 night scenes movie is going to cost, but still demand the version of it that justifies the cost? How do you be an assistant director in terms of understanding the logistics that goes into making a film, and then walk into your own movie and fight for the things that you know are going to be hard? And on that front, I don't necessarily have a clear answer, but I do have a working answer. And here's what I'll share with you, is that having production knowledge isn't permission to do less. It's actually permission to do more, but only if you fight for it with a purpose. And what I mean is that a producer who becomes a director, and I'm using producer in the pejorative term of someone who understands production, a producer, an AD, a PM, and things like that, having all that knowledge is advantageous when you become a director, because it allows you to identify before anybody else can the 3 or 4 things in the movie that are going to be the hardest, the most expensive, but also worth it. And you know what to fight for. You know what compromises are going to be real, and you know which compromises are going to be just laziness dressed up as practicality. I don't want to try for it because it's going to be too hard. You know where the money has to go, and you can be ruthless about saving it in other ways. So you know where you can save it, and you know where you can spend it. And then you actively choose. Every day, you are actively choosing to spend the saved money on being ambitious rather than trying to build up a bigger cushion. Even as an assistant director, I don't get bonus points for finishing early. I only get credited if the movie gets finished. And this for us as in this world of like, too much and that can cost you your ambition, is that the temptation is that you want to bank everything against being risky. And you try to stay safe and you try to deliver things cleanly. Clean and safe are not why we're in this. Clean and safe is actually a consolation prize. And our job is to know production well enough to take intelligent risks, not no risks and not stupid risks, but intelligent risks. This means that there are some, key commitments that as a director you want to make to yourself when you're making a film. Like, what are the things, and not necessarily the elements, like it's like saying to yourself, I need, this has to be in the movie or whatever. It's more the idea of what are the pieces of the movie that you're going to be uncompromising about. The certain vision that you have that's uncompromised, whatever the budget that's needed to support that uncompromised part is what the budget will support. And then we find the rest of the movie in what's left. So that means that, you start to think, well, then, that affects like your lighting, it affects everything that you're doing, because what you want to do is make sure that the things that matter, and isn't just, we're not talking about scenes, it's more like the overall feeling of the film, but like there are certain key elements that you must fight for, because otherwise there's no point in making it. So you defend those things. Everything else you make negotiable. That's how a producer who knows so much about how to build a film can still make a movie worth watching, not by ignoring what they know, but being sure that they know to draw the line in the right place and then refusing to cross it. So that's the director that I'm trying to be. And it's also the producer I'm trying to be, because I think as a producer, I want to make those kind of films. I want directors that I work with to find their uncompromising moments and then to tell me as a producer what those are so that we can fight for them and find a way to make them work. So I don't want to be a producer who directs, and I don't want to be a director who happens to know production. What I want to do is something more specific than either. I'm a director who spent 2 decades now learning in very granular and sometimes very painful detail exactly what it costs to make a movie, and using every bit of that knowledge to not make a small movie, but to make a big movie, to use that knowledge to my advantage, to be ambitious and to say, like, I might only have X amount of dollars, but my knowledge allows me to make that X amount of dollars look like we spent 10 times more on it. To make that same dollar go further than someone who doesn't know what they're getting out of it, to make sure that we're spending money in the right place and getting more value out of what we spend than what we actually spend. And then not spending all that money on stuff that I know is not going to be on the screen. So taking that production literacy and turning it into creative leverage. So that's the bet I'm trying to make. And so we'll find out if I'm right. Okay, let me bring this home for you guys. This is sort of my little soliloquy this week. Most of the people listening to this podcast are filmmakers. You're either a producer, you're an aspiring director, or you are someone who is curious about wanting to make movies and trying to figure out how. So the takeaway that I want to give you is, if you want to direct, sit in production seats first, pay your dues. Not because you need it as a ladder, because you're not going to get promoted to being a director, but use that as education and as training, because the most valuable education available to you is in this business, and one that that very few people talk about, is that being paid to learn on set as an assistant director or in that key role is going to cover you far, far, far more than anything else you do. So be a first assistant director, be a second AD. It doesn't have to be on a feature film. Just be a first AD or a second AD on a short film. Be a producer, be a UPM, be a script supervisor. You will understand editing far more if you learn how to be a script supervisor. Sit in the rooms where the days are getting built and where decisions are being made. Watch directors solve in real time the problems that you're going to face. Take notes, not on just necessarily shots, but on decisions that get made. Why are they made? Why made this way and not that way? What are they protecting? What are they letting go? How are they recovering when something isn't working? Those are the best lessons you can learn on set. And don't let what you learn make you think smaller, because that can be a trap as well. And, this knowledge that you gain from working on set should be a leverage, not a leash. The point of learning how things get made is to make better things, not safer things. So sitting in chairs, taking notes, and then when it's your turn, use everything you've learned to fight for the version of the film that you want to make. Not necessarily just the achievable version, but the right version, the one that justifies all of these years of preparation. And in the end, vision without production knowledge is really just a daydream. Production knowledge without vision is a service business. The director's job is to hold both. And the only place you learn how to hold both is to watch it happen. So that's the work. That's the whole job. So if this is the kind of thing that gets you thinking you want more of, let me know. We will be back next week with a new episode of Off the Lot. Until then, go make the thing, take notes, spend this tuition of knowledge you learn. The movie you're going to make is being built right now in your head and in whatever chair you're sitting in. So thanks a lot. This was Off the Lot. We'll see you next week.
Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.